The Economic and Social Council has 54 members for 3-year terms. Here again, they are selected according to regional distributions. They are responsible for some 70% of financial resources of the UN. You fall into those 70%. The regular budget you get from the UN gets into this pot. They review the work of the specialized agency, commission, regional commission, and what has been the biggest change in the UN system, I assume also in ITC, is the role of the NGOs. Do NGOs now have any authority? I mean, do you have any link with ITC work or not?
Not formally.
Not formally.
Not but informally.
Not like this.
Not like this.
ITC doesn't have any assembly of its own, so
Yeah,
there is only the joint advisory group
Yeah, so there is
where
really
NGOs could observe, but
there is really no space for them.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Where the biggest role is in the Human Rights Council. That's where, because they've almost participated role in the human rights discussion. Okay, now let's go.
That's an interesting point, though. That's an interesting point. If you could park it for a second.
Sure.
On the NGOs, it's about our JAG, the annual general meeting. They can attend as observers, they can attend, participate, but typically they don't. We don't have a lot of people from the NGOs
Do you
coming.
invite them?
Well, that was my point, is that, you know, if we invite them, or if we make an effort to have them present, maybe they'll show up, or we provide a little bit of funding for the key partners with whom we want to partner. Meaning, you know, those people who we want to have their voice represented, or we want to get some feedback on, would be interesting.
Is it possible, sorry, the counter, is it possible that there just aren't many NGOs that are interested in what we do?
No, there are a couple.
NGOs are more usually,
Okay, but
unless your work is very technical, NGOs are more interested in more global type of issues like the biggest human rights, climate. I would think yours being more technical, there are probably less NGOs linked to your work than you take human rights, where you have so many NGOs which are linked to what they do. And the Human Rights Council gives them a much more participatory role than that. But they're all like registered with, with the ECOSOC as observers. Okay, this is a map of the UN system. Can you find ITC?
No.
Hmm?
No. I've tried before.
Yeah.
Is it there?
Yeah.
Is it actually there?
You can, does this have a beamer?
Oh, right under Octa.
Yes,
No.
exactly. You see it?
I've seen a different version.
Now, let me ask you something. When you see this image, this graph, this diagram of the UN, what impression does it give?
Chaos.
Chaos! Bravo! Chaos! Total chaos. The poor people of DPI try to give like a sort of work to figure out chaos,
A jigsaw that doesn't match.
a jig of a puzzle, and there are some major organizations which are not there because we go like the climate change is not even this. But let's quickly go over. Oh, you have a beaver? That's great.
Yeah, you can use this.
Okay. So, we have the United Nations system. You see that the UN General Assembly, Security Council, ECOSOC, Secretariat, Court of Justice, Trusteeship Council. Okay. Then we go to like this, General Assembly. You have the subsidiary bodies, and then that are all program and funds. So, what is ITC? Where does it fit into this group?
It's a program.
It's not an agency.
Programs and funds.
What is the difference between a program and a fund and the agency, which are somewhere here?
Sorry, what?
What's the difference between a program and fund?
Yeah.
Well, a program or a fund can be created by the General Assembly by a vote by a resolution or by ECOSOC, whereas a specialized agency needs to be created by a constitutive act by member states.
You're a lawyer?
Sorry?
Are you a lawyer by training?
No, but I had formal training in international law.
Okay.
I have a master's degree in it.
Okay. Because it's something that most people get lost. I mean, I've never understood the difference until I was chief of protocol, and I was told that those people have precedence over these people.
Yeah.
These people are what I call the children of the General Assembly. They are somehow created through a General Assembly resolution. These are created totally independent from the General Assembly. Actually, some of those are precede the UN. The oldest one is ITU, 1860 something, and I've been followed by UPU, followed in 1866, 67, and I think the next one is ILO, 1919. Yep. What you have here, what this shows, is that when states have a problem that they are going to address, they can create anything they want. They can either create an agency or they can create a fund and program.
Sorry, which one we can call an agency?
These agencies, they have nothing to do with the General Assembly. I will tell you where you really see their budget doesn't get approved by the General Assembly. Well, all these bodies here have their budget going through the committee. The bottom line, the bottleneck is the money. Who approves the money? As always. These people have their own constituency. You take, for example, ILO. Assume their General Assembly Minister of Labor. You take UNESCO, it's definitely a Ministry of Culture and Education.
So they get their core funding independent of what happens in New York?
They get their core funding independent
They're
from
just associated to the UN, members of the club, kind of.
They are member of the club, usually through the ECOSOC.
Right.
You see, through all these, all the reports go through the ECOSOC, and some very strange ones, which are related, go to the Security, some of them go to the Security Council. They call it the lost arrows. But for example, where is IAEA? IAEA is not an agency of the UN. And their report goes to the Security Council. But they're all essentially independent in terms of budget. The General Assembly has no authority over these and these, while they have authority over this group.
So where do they get their budget from?
They get their budget from their own, let's take ILO, Minister of Labours. They decide on a budget, and then each of their government provides the budget through the specific ministry.
So in effect, they actually have their own governing body.
They don't do it. They do their own General Assembly. Like, for example, UNESCO is usually Ministry of Culture. And for example, Palestine has decided that they want to join. They can join these, but they could not join these.
And in UNESCO, that's a big effect.
They had a problem with that. They lost basically their budget.
They joined UNESCO, I think.
They joined UN and the US cut contribution to it.
You see, they can join any of those, they cannot join these.
Can I ask a question specifically about ITC? Because I'm sure I've seen a version of this where ITC didn't appear. And formally, when we submit documents to the UN, we're a sub-program of Program 10, which is UNCTAD. And yet, sometimes when we talk to our counterparts in New York, they describe us as just a grant. Oh, you're just a grant. You're not really, it's not really part of the UN. You're just a grant. Don't worry about it. So, in some senses, we seem to have chosen to be fully joining this gang, but in other senses, particularly where they see us, we don't seem to be fully part of the club. And this has real ramifications for, and the evaluation that I was mentioning earlier, let's pick this up, real ramifications for which rules, in a sense, we choose to work under.
When we speak about about what's an interesting point that you make. I will tell you something quite interesting. You see, UNCTAD has an ITC under. You have a larger delegation of authority than UNCTAD. The delegation of authority that EVA has is higher than the delegation of authority that UNCTAD has.
Why? Because nobody paid attention.
I
Probably.
know. I think I
We
will
are
tell
talking
you. I
about the
suspect
UN.
why, because you are financed through both the UN and WTO, and nobody knew how to figure it out.
Very rough.
So
That
I
must be
suspect
the only
they said,
reason.
let's get them, because ITC is a delegation of authority of the size of UNDP, but UNCTAD doesn't. Je ne sais pas. I don't know why. The historical reason. But let me tell you something common about most of these, except for UNRWA. But you take UNCTAD, ITC, UNDP, UNFPA, then they all come out of the time of the decolonization. They all came out of the growth of technical assistance program in the 60s. That's when you had a lot of this organization. You were created more or less at the same year as UNDP, UNCTAD and UNIDO. And why is UNIDO an agency? I have no idea. UNIDO is an agency which actually, to me, should have been a fund and program because they were created for purely technical cooperation region.
They have a charter of their own.
Yeah, but why did member state? You see, member state could have decided to put them somewhere here. The agency doesn't create itself. It's member state who decided. Why did member state at the time decide it here instead of here? Who knows?
It might have been because of who was backing it in terms of being based in Vienna, basically.
But there could have still been a nation fund and program because you have drug and crime which are in Vienna.
Yes, true.
So you know, there must have been an IAs in Vienna. There must have been a reason at the time that they decided to have their own independent governmental body. Who knows? But you were created at the time of the growth of technical cooperation. And the problem, by the way, that UNIDO is facing is that they have less and less support. And I think part of the reason is that because they have their own governing body, which means that it creates a set of problems they didn't foresee when they were created as an agency. Any questions about all this chaos?
Do you have a handout? Because I can't see anything.
See you.
I don't have a handout of this I can give you, but you will get to I mean, it's on the UN website. This you will get these on the UN website. Now, what is very interesting about this, it's all about intergovernmental process, is that you have huge organizations which are some are part of the UN, which DPI decided to hell with them because we don't have the space. It's all the treaty organization. You take UN, FCCC, the Triple C, you know, the climate change, with this, they control hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of projects. They have a huge organization in Vienna, in the Bonn. They have major, global political impact. They are not here. And it's an interesting little story, if I may. I will tell you the story. I had to do once an analysis, a management review of UNFCCC, that's why I know about the story. You read what they're supposed to do 10 times, and you still do not understand what they're supposed to do. 20 times, I couldn't tell you what they're supposed to do. They came out of what is called the Rio Conference of the early 90s, and they're 92, and they were the three Rio sisters, the climate change, desertification, biodiversity. But let's stick with climate change. How does climate change get its money? Who do they report to? The strangest thing, climate change has its own what they call conference of the parties. They have their own governing bodies that decide on their budget. No, the logic would have been to put them under, where is UNEP? Somewhere UNEP is here, there, you see? The logic would have been to link them to UNEP, to make them report to the General Assembly through UNEP. They did not. Those ministries, those ministers, wanted to have their independent organization. Therefore, they created something completely different, completely separate, that has really no link to UNEP. Now, I suspect that when those ministers of the environment came back home and decided to create their little organization, still, I assume their government thought, we're not going to have that thing out of nowhere. We have to find a link to the UN. So they linked it to the UN. It's in their the bylaws of the UN and FCC that they report to the General Assembly through a little UN department, not so little, which is not even because we didn't put the UN department. You know what is DESA?
Yeah.
Okay. The UNFCC, the elephant, reports through the General Assembly, through DESA, through the mouse, because DESA budget compared to UNFCC is nothing. But so that was a way that the government decided to link it to the UN. They have the complete independent budget. Their budget does not go through the fifth committee, doesn't go through the General Assembly, doesn't go through the ACBQ. It is totally approved by the Conference of the Parties. But there again, I suspect their government wanted somehow to give some oversight, so they said that they would get delegation of authority from the United Nations, which means that the control of the UN, whenever there is a new certified approval officer of UNFCC sends him a note, and the controller has complained in writing, I saw the memo, in writing, saying, how can I delegate an authority I don't have? I don't see the budget, I don't see their accounts, I don't know what the people they select. And they were told by the Office of Legal Affairs, it's in their bylaws and it has been accepted by the General Assembly. You have to do it. It simply shows you how organizations get created by member states, what I call à la carte. If they don't like le menu du jour, which would have been to put the UNFCC on the UNEP, they decided to create their own organization, totally independent. And there is, I would say, a movement more and more to de-link organization to the UN. Another organization that was created recently, but much smaller, is IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, which is stationed in Abu Dhabi. And the member states decided no link whatsoever with UN. It's an IGO, but it doesn't report any. For political reasons, there is more and more problems of having an organization which is somehow linked to the UN. Any comments? Because it could have, you remember you told me that ITC have been told to do less and less like the UN. Yes, there is a, but it's difficult for you because you are there. It's very hard to divorce once you are there. But new international organizations are created like in the periphery of the UN.
I think I can understand that. It really depends. It really shows the interests of the states. Whenever there is a very strong interest in a very sensitive issue like climate change, like, I don't know, energy issues, trade, for example. And so basically, if you have an organization which is dealing from the UN, then you don't have all the accountability that goes with it. So you don't have this a huge sounding board that you would have if it was linked to the UN. You would have, ECOs, or you would need to comply with, all sorts of procedures, UN procedures, etc. And I think that, if you want to keep things privately, quiet, then you create an ad hoc organization and then you keep it there. And you can discuss it more freely. I mean, in climate change issues, you can see how sensitive that is. And you can see how what discretions states have in making commitments. It's basically really a bargain, and that's why they don't really move, they don't really progress, because It's really, sovereignty of states and their kind of intrinsic interests, very sensitive interests that are discussed there, and that's why they don't want to place this in a context that would, put very strong spotlight on those issues.
I have a question about the use of the word international. I mean, in the sense that who confers the ability, I mean, in a sense, to put international on your name? To give the impression that it's a sort of global jurisdiction, when in fact it may represent just a smaller club.
Whoever creates organization can call it whatever they want. And you take, for example, UN and international agencies, and they really reproduce the UN. They call the name, they use the name international. They have permanent mission. IRINA is the only international organization outside the Western,
Firmament.
Yeah, it's the only one. It's in Abu Dhabi. And they call themselves, but I don't know how many members are there, maybe 125. But if you take the climate change, what is the membership? 170, I think.
Yeah.
So it is not because they create something parallel that they're really that different. First of all, I would tell you the first thing they do, they knock at the door of the UN and say, give us your financial rule, your administrative rule, personal rules, and they copy them. International Criminal Court, same thing. It's not part of the UN. The first thing they did is give us all your rules and procedures, which they hire former UN people to reproduce exactly the same system. So, because there is really not that, how different can you be when you're an international organization? You still need some type of general assembly. You can call it a conference of the parties, but it still is the same principle. It cannot be that different. But for reasons which, like for the Americans, it's important because it avoids issues with the Congress. I know for the Americans why they didn't want IRINA to be part of the UN, because in the United States, if you say United Nations, they see black helicopter, hovering around the US and the supranational. So they were very strong. It's a lot of perception. Any questions here about? Oh no, there is this. I found it. See, there is this. So climate change reports through DESA, which has a budget maybe of $5 million. I don't know, maybe 10. And climate change has a budget which is in the hundreds of millions. But that's what government decided to link them. Okay, so you see where you are. You are here, and you are within the chart of program and funds. Don't be surprised if you call up somebody in New York and they have no idea where you fit. Because this is quite... it functions very much independently because you have a huge delegation of authority. You really have no, you are not part, besides UNCTAD, you really don't belong to any of these other organizations. And in New York, they are lost in their own universe, and they wouldn't really know what is ITC. They probably would think it's an agency. Okay, we just went through that, international organization, funds and program, all the children, I call them of the General Assembly. So, here you are. You were created in 64, UNDP 65, NFP 67. All part of the big technical cooperation program. A lot of the other funds and programs are more humanitarian. The first one, UNICEF and HCR, and then WFP.
Actually, I have a question with regard to the name of the center, because the OHCHR used to be a center, the UN Center for Human Rights, and it was a center, so it was not, again, it was not a treaty body. So was the center some kind of form that was used in the past, is no longer used?
What was it called before? The Human Rights? The office
UN Center for Human Rights. Before it was called the office.
It was a subsidiary of ECOSOC.
Yeah.
And why wasn't it created as an independent council at the time of the charter? There must have been many political reasons why it was decided to be an office that would report to ECOSOC. When they decided to create it, to establish, where is it? The office of, it really is now. They should have, to me, they should have amended the charter. Because it has a Human Rights Council, is a council like ECOSOC.
Yeah.
It's a council, to me, it should have been the seventh organ. I mean, it should have been, but I guess for many political reasons, the idea of changing the charter. Do you understand what I mean? Why I say that the Human Rights Council is really like the seventh organ of the UN? Because if you look at the sixth organ, okay, you have the General Assembly, the Secretariat, Security Council, the ECOSOC, Trusteeship Council, and the International Court of Justice. The Human Rights Council is the same authority as ECOSOC. It has membership which are voted in a very complicated system, regionally based, for a certain period, correct? Exactly like the ECOSOC. But I guess amending the charter was something that nobody wanted to do. So they left it like aside.
Sorry, are you saying that Human Rights Council is not listed there under the UN system?
It is, but it is not to me where it should be. It should be, because it is a council.
Where is it located now?
Or in one of the UN council bodies, probably somewhere. Whenever you look for it, somewhere. Where is it? Here, on the subsidiary bodies. You see, Human Rights Council is a subsidiary body. But in reality, in view of its authority, it has the same authority as economic as ECOSOC. It has much, but they didn't want to change it. I don't know for what political reason. They put the council here, at the same level as the International Law Commission, which it is not. It's much more independent body.
Because it would have been impossible to amend the charter, basically.
Probably. Yeah. I mean, the idea of discussing amendment of the charter, it was decided just to leave it hanging, there.
But also because the Human Rights Council has a very specific jurisdiction. It oversees a number of human rights related conventions that used to have their own committees. I don't know what the structure is, how is it set up now, but probably they have their own committees like the Committee of the Rights of the Child and
but you see, so does ECOSOC. Look at ECOSOC, it has all those. They could have put it, you see ECOSOC here is always functional. So they could have put it as the number 7, because it is definitely as important as ECOSOC. If you look at ECOSOC, you have all those functional commissions, social status of women, they have all the regional commission. ECE is a subsidiary body of the ECOSOC. The 5 regional commissions. But I suspect it was for political reason, the idea of discussing at the General Assembly, amending the charter to put the council higher up. Probably everybody decided it wasn't worth the time it would take. But it certainly is as complex, if not more than this.
I have a question. What difference does it make where Human Rights Council?
None. But it would have been, should have been in the charter as far as I'm concerned. I mean, practical purpose, none. But it would have reflected more the mandate of the UN to put it as a council. But this is more of a philosophical discussion. It makes no difference in practical purpose. Okay. So, you are part of the funds and program. So you were established by the GA. You don't really have an executive board like a real fund and program. Like UNDP is an executive board that reviews their budget. I don't think that the JAG manages anything to do with budget. While the fund and program like UNICEF, UNDP, World Food Program is a fund and program. They all have an executive board which also reviews budgetary matter. Also, your JAG is who belongs. I think it's more voluntary, while an executive board, it goes again by election.
No, the JAG is open to any.
It's open to India. Okay. But you get a delegation of data from the SG, your budget gets approved by the fifth committee, and you report to the UNGAs through ECOSOC. I call funds and program. Okay. I wanted somebody to speak a little bit about the JAG here. Is anybody here?
I recommend
Okay.
Rob White.
That was me, but to be honest, given the depth of experience in the room, you guys, I'm sure, collectively know a lot more than I do about the JAG. So maybe it's best just to distill that together. I mean, my take on the JAG, having been here once, in one cycle of seeing the JAG work and having some responsibility over our dealings with it, is it's a sort of quasi-governing body. But as you've just said, it doesn't really have much formal power over what we do. But by convention, it's a gathering of our membership once a year. It sits for 2 days and here's how we've been doing for the last year and gives broad recommendations for where we go forward. A report from it goes and is, I think, formally ratified by our parent bodies.
It goes to WTO,
WTO
and to UNCTAD.
And to UNCTAD. But in terms of budget setting, going on from what you said before about where the real power lies, we don't do any of our budgetary processes through the JAG at all.
So essentially, it doesn't really, does the JAG endorse your program or not? Like in UNDP, the board will look at the program for the next 2 years?
It will have an influence and will give some comments, but it doesn't. There's no sort of moment of going. Yeah,
Member state provide. I used to be a delegate, so I was actually delegated to the JAG as well. So the JAG can basically collect comments, and the member states can welcome the operational program, the strategic framework, whatever. And they can, and basically what they used to do, and they probably still do, is that they announce their financial commitments, but there is no discussion as to the budget, as to any specific planning. This is really done either through management here or through governing bodies at the WTO and the Fifth Committee. This is where the real issues of budgets are discussed.
Sorry, just to add to that, this ambiguity and sort of lack of real power at the JAG can create problems for us, as it did a couple of cycles ago.
Oh yeah.
Where we took and was discussed and agreed a proposed a new strategic framework, i.e., what's our big goals and how does that break down in terms of what are we actually trying to achieve in the world and how should we measure that, our sort of outcome framework. JAG agreed it, went, yeah, great, lovely, we like it. We then had to get it through the formal processes in New York, who didn't like it and reverted us back to something we didn't like either. So we ended up in this difficult situation of having had our quasi-governing body agree one thing, and part of our formal decision-making process agree something else. It left us in a very difficult place about what to do.
Well, you are an interesting organization because of that double-headed type of system between WTO and the UN, which gives some problem, also some flexibility.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, you have a higher delegation of authority on many things than the UN funded program.
So then the question that follows from that, Rob, would be, is then that a question of sequencing, or is there another sort of solution to that as well?
There might be some sort of prosaic answers, but I think the contradiction we're living with is that the JAG is not the answer to the complexity of having two big parent bodies. And the JAG doesn't resolve that. The JAG is not coming together of UNCTAD and WTO to work out how we're doing and set our strategic agenda. In fact, it feels like something quite different to that.
What would be interesting to have a separate discussion on that, because that is a little bit of a black box for ITC staff in a sense, because governance has been raised many times in the context of reports. which have been submitted by various bodies evaluating ITC. And we haven't really seen a kind of definitive conclusion to that discussion, meaning that we, first of all, don't know the mechanics of it, meaning that the trust funds, the Global Trust Fund has more power over ITC than does the JAG, because the core group of donors who fund our programs are the ones who call the shots, and that's a small group. So we have, as Rob is saying, a delinking of our strategic intent and the money to fund it. So New York has a very rigid view of what we need to provide.
Yeah.
You know, X number of publications, X number, you know, very
Yes.
output driven, very output driven. Whereas we're trying to go to a different place, which is more synthetic and more, you know.
What is the impact that we're trying to
Yes.
You are stuck. You are stuck with the UN
But basically, the
budget.
governance is fragmented because there is the XB money
Yes.
that ITC is managing. It's roughly the 50% of the money that,
Yeah.
that ITC manages overall. So basically, there is a governance structure for that, which is the consultative council of the donors, and you have a small club of donors there, and not all the donors can participate. So it's very, very selective. But again, this only
Council.
it only has a say on the XB.
Yeah.
And not all of the XB, but all the XB that goes into the fund, because you have lots of bilateral programs going on as well. So the JAG can express views on whatever ITC is doing, whether it's on its XB budget or whether it's on its regular budget, but it has, formally speaking, has no power, no say, no authority on creating, you know, amending things, changing things. So it's basically an advisory body. But it could create a lot of problems, as you say, because you have all the member states there, and you know, if you have a group of donors that wants to push ITC in one direction, then you will have India, China, and plus others, and say, hey, we're still there, we're member states, so please don't push it that way. We want to pull it this way.
Just two things to add to that. One, the CCRTF, which is our sort of, again, even more informal than the JAG advisory group around our trust fund in theory. Actually, it isn't just donors, it includes beneficiary countries as well. But it's just advisory.
As observers.
Okay, but in effect, it's an advisory group, and the donor countries and the beneficiary countries are treated equally, in effect, having sat in quite a number of groups. And it's just advisory, it doesn't really set the pace. The other thing I would say is that all this complexity, and this links to one thing you just said, all this complexity governs only 25% of our money. Because we only get half our money as RB, and only half of that comes from the UN. So there, again, there's paradoxes in our relationships.
But essentially, for the regular budget, you are stuck because you depend on this, the General Assembly. So whatever format they want you to use, you cannot fight it. Because that's the format that they give to everybody who applies for a regular budget.
Mm-hmm.
They are not so much concerned about sort of form more than substance.
To be honest, sorry, having sat through the last two ACABQ meetings, who were the expert advisors, I mean, you'll know more about this, aren't you? Who were the expert advisors, as I understand it, who advised the General Assembly, in effect. Their view was, blimey, ITC really is quite different. Why are you doing all this process when it's a done deal? Because partly this has to go through WTO in a different time frame, and the sequencing doesn't work, and how can we actually influence what's going on here? So their view actually seemed to be, to me, we should have more exceptions to the process for you, because you are so different. So it was interesting to hear that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when there were attempts for governance, for reforms of the governance of ITC in 2008, actually the same member states blocked it, because they said, well, we still want to have a say in ITC, and if we want to basically delink it from any UN budgetary processes, etc., we don't agree. So
That's huge, because the advisory committee is made out of independent experts and they might have an expert opinion that will not fit governmental parameters. So eventually they always come back where we want it, like the rest of, like everybody else. Okay. By the way, let me quickly tell you that all these various agencies, plus 11 funds and programs, get all together under what is called the Chief Executive Board. And that's where they agree on the real broad parameters of the UN system and also on some administrative and managerial issues. But it's more of a pro forma type of link between them than any real one. I think they meet about twice a year. And the Secretary General is like the head of that Chief Executive Board.